Hey guys, what's going on? It's Eric with Mind Melt Podcast, and today I am so honored and grateful to announce that I've got Lawrence Krauss on the podcast. Lawrence Krauss is a physicist, he is an author, a great public speaker. He has been in a lot of debates with theists, and I have followed his career for quite some time. I think our conversation was amazing. This has been a dream of mine. When I started this podcast, I had it as a dream to have Lawrence Krauss on my podcast, and to have this opportunity to share space with him and discuss big topics, which I think that we did, was just such an honor. So I just want to thank everybody, because really the listeners are the reason that this podcast is able to go in this direction. I never thought that I'd be able to sit down and talk with Lawrence Krauss. I'm just amazed. I mean, it was so awesome. I think that him and I really clicked. I think that there's so much more that we could talk about, and I certainly hope that we get to that eventually. I think that, we're going to be able to talk again in the future. I just want to, once again, thank you guys so much for listening and so much for supporting this podcast. And I just can't thank you enough. So yeah, I also just wanted to touch base with you on just some ways to support the podcast other than listening, if you feel so inclined. I don't have any commercials. I don't have any Patreon. I'm not looking for payment on this podcast at all. And that's probably going to stay that way, I imagine, for a long time. I know everybody says that when they first start out. But I just don't see the point in selling mattresses. I don't see the point in trying to hawk some product that I don't believe in. If there's ever a time where there's a product that I truly believe in, I will definitely go that direction. But for now, this podcast is free. All I request is that you give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, because that is currency in the podcast world. That is a huge way of supporting my podcast and supporting me, essentially. So if you don't mind, just go to Stitcher, go to iTunes, and write a review. Another way that you can do that is sharing. Word of mouth is a great way to get the podcast out there. If you enjoy this conversation, pick up one of Lawrence Krauss's books. I've read 6 of his books, I think. I think he has like 10 or something. I think I've read about 6. They're all great. He's a phenomenal author. He has a great way of relaying information. And I get buried in his books. They're so good. And so definitely be sure to pick one of those up. One more thing, if you want to, we've got a Facebook page now. Go ahead and like that. It's Mind Melt Podcast. We've also got, Instagram and Twitter. Twitter seems to be growing pretty rapidly, which is really awesome to see. I think that we've got like 600 followers now, which for Twitter, that's huge, because I have zero interest in Twitter. I've never posted on Twitter, really. I'm trying to get better at it, though. So follow me, and it'll give me more reason to post shit on there. But I am going to stop rambling now. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. I hope that you have an amazing Christmas, because this will be released on Christmas Eve. So once again, thank you, and have an amazing Christmas and a great New Year. Okay, love you guys. Thanks. Okay, I'm here with Lawrence Krauss. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm happy to be with you virtually on this rainy night.
Yeah, it's very rainy where I'm at too. It was miserable today, and as far as weather goes. But
yeah, well,
take it with the good with the bad, and it's not snowing here.
Yeah, exactly. It's not snowing.
Yeah,
right side.
Yeah. So I have been a huge admirer of yours for a long time. I've read a couple of your books, and I've watched probably every minute that you have online, if that's possible.
Well, you're a masochist, so obviously.
I probably am. And I mean, just I love the way that you teach. It's in a very, you're really good at explaining things, and one thing I've noticed about hucksters is the way that they explain things is to wrap your mind around words instead of principles.
Yeah, to obfuscate things. Yeah.
Yeah.
I try.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
glad. First, I thought you were talking about me as a huckster, but I'm glad you're not.
no, definitely not.
I see your dog there too. That's good to know that he or she is listening.
Yeah, he is pretty much always here. I didn't realize that you could see him, but
Yeah, he came by to say hi. My dog may come by too, so it's okay.
Great.
Anyway.
Yeah, so just to kind of get started, why don't we talk a little bit about you? I mean, I know you've written a lot of books and you're a physicist, and what do you do for fun?
Everything. I mean, I don't think you can be I don't think you can be an active and accomplished scientist unless the work is fun. So I have to say that physics is fun. And I enjoy writing too. I mean, the process of writing is not always enjoyable. Let's make that quite clear.
I understand.
So that's work at times, but ultimately I enjoy that. I don't think you do anything intensively unless you enjoy it. But then for fun outside of those things, life is fun. I try and enjoy everything from learning about any new subject to going out for good meals, watching movies, skiing sometimes, and
Nice.
biking, and I used to fish and scuba diving. But I mean, I think I've never differentiated between work and play, I guess.
I feel the same way. And anytime that something's become work, I've normally left it immediately. So.
I think, if it becomes work, if it just becomes ruin. I mean, look, I shouldn't say it. I've had jobs when I was younger. You have to earn money, and it's work. But hopefully, if you enter a career eventually, then it's not so much work. But I've known people who said. I remember I many years ago I actually worked on a history book when I was quite young, and I interviewed a person for the history book, and his point was he claimed you should always get a job that's incredibly boring, and so that you could think about other things, and then when it was over you could do the important things. So people have different attitudes, so who am I to say?
Well, one thing I like about my job, I build custom furniture and cabinets, and I listen to podcasts and interviews all day. So it's been.
So there you go. It's
So for me, it's kind of cool because I live in northern Idaho, and I start like listening to your podcast with Joe Rogan. Actually, like reignited my fire for science. I've always been into science. But listening to the way that you talked about it just totally reignited my fire, and I went on a frenzy of just like listening to all of your material. So
that's great. Well, good. I did that. I remember doing that podcast. At the time I didn't know who Joe Rogan was.
Yeah.
And I agreed to do it anyway, and it turned out to be not a bad idea.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was good because it kind of got me back into science. I've taken some biology classes and some physics classes, even though it's kind of over my head, honestly. But I still enjoy it. And
as long as you enjoy it, you don't have to master it. That's the great thing about.
Yeah.
I used to tell my colleagues, I mean, if you're teaching physics students, it's one thing, but if you're teaching non-physics students, which I often did, then and even physics students, the point is that not everyone's taking a class is going to be a professional physicist. So those people have to master the material. But if you're just educating people, then the level of mastery is different. They're not going to become professional physicists, so they have to understand the ideas, but they don't have to necessarily be able to reproduce them at a level that a physicist would. And it takes it's hard for many faculty to get that mind around that. They tend to want to teach clones of themselves.
Right. Yeah. I think that's probably how a lot of the teacher to student, master to sensei ratio seems to go.
Yeah.
But being a good teacher is teaching people how to figure it out on their own, I think. And
to teach them how to figure out how to ask the right kind of questions.
Yeah.
And I mean, ultimately, teachers only lead people. They don't really teach. Most of the teaching is done on your own. I mean, most of the learning is done on your own.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Seems to me more than anything.
Yeah, I went to Christian school most of my childhood.
Oh, my condolences.
I know, it's amazing that I made it out alive.
A lot of people do. In fact, it might be a good training for people to become atheists. But anyway.
Well, it actually totally was, because by the time that I was 15 or 16, I was an atheist. And
I think it happens to a lot of people. I mean, look, everyone's who is exposed to religion, you can have two attitudes to it. But I think a lot of people, they get exposed to it, and once they grow up enough to realize the stories are kind of silly, they just sort of grow out of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I almost think though that Christian schools should be illegal because it's like they're not really teaching real
Well,
things.
I mean, it depends what they're doing. I mean, if it's a Christian, I mean, there are Catholic schools that teach material in it. But look,
Yeah.
you've probably heard me say it if you've really seen everything I've done, that
Yeah.
that foisting religion on children is child abuse. But what I mean by that is that kids, these are concepts are very esoteric and to some extent sophisticated, and to try and imbue that in kids is to brainwash them, and that's not a good thing. But
I
so I
totally
think
agree.
I think most look, I think every school that doesn't teach kids how to think, I don't know if it should be illegal, but it should be closed down.
Yeah. I mean, there should be certain source material that is just law. I mean, in my opinion, I think that if you're going to have regulations I'm all about freedom
Yeah, but
and
public education, I agree. I mean, there
yeah,
should be certain things that you need. What a public school should do is teach kids the tools they need to be productive, successful adults if they want to be.
right.
And those tools involve certain things like learning how to read and write and some mathematics too. But beyond that, it seems to me the main thing is to teach critical thinking.
Yeah.
And the subjects, there's just more information, as I like to say, on my my phone than there's more misinformation. And what you want to
Yeah.
teach, you want to teach kids is how to tell the difference between the two in the 21st century. And so those are the tools. I mean, whether you do it in a science class or a history class or an English class, it's not as important, it seems to me. So the content isn't as important as the critical thinking, teaching them how to tell sense from nonsense, and the basics, as I say, reading, writing, and arithmetic, as we used to say when I grew up.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with that because, like I said, I went to Christian school, so I didn't really get a real education, and then I ended up dropping out anyways. So the education that I did get was short-lived, and but I think that as far as like critical thinking goes and things like that, I've definitely, I mean, it's been a long road, but I've taught myself along the way.
And teaching yourself. We should teach kids. The other thing schools should do is teach kids to be lifelong learners.
Absolutely.
And I've told my students, I knew more as a professional physicist. I learned more physics after I got my PhD than all the years of training up to my PhD. So if you expect to stop learning when you finish school, whether it's high school or college, then I think you stop living in some sense.
I totally agree with you. I think that, well, especially, I mean, the universe is just so, the universe is so amazing. And the fact that people just want to throw it under a encapsulation of like, if it's not a religion, it's a conspiracy. So if it's not, the God did it, the government did it. And so it's like, but it doesn't really, it kind of kills all the wonder. And
it kills the wonder, but it also stops thinking, right? I mean,
right, yeah.
God did it is usually just one simple way of saying, I don't want to think about it.
Exactly. But it's really strange to me that people wouldn't, because I mean, even if you don't want to put the effort into thinking about it, just to like, I don't know, I guess take a step back and just say, I don't know, and be okay with that being an answer.
Look, you've heard me say that I think teachers, parents, and everyone should be okay with saying, I don't know, because that's the first step to either learning it or being excited by the mysteries. So craving certainty is a real unfortunate thing that many people feel the need for, and life is just full of uncertainty. And we should also maybe be teaching kids that in school too. I mean, I've often said the problem with many of the ways we teach is we give kids problems that are completely solvable as homework problems, and much of what happens in life is not exactly solvable in that way. So you have to teach kids to go beyond the barriers and say, okay, that problem isn't solvable. Maybe I can solve one that is different. And so life is full of uncertainty, and I'm not sure schools train people for that. And not knowing is a wonderful thing, and we should all be proud of being able to say it and encourage others to either teach us or help us learn about it.
Yeah, I said, I have a friend of mine that says, like, I'm praying for you that you're going to see God, like you're going to come back to religion. I'm praying for you. And I said, perfect. Use that as a science experiment to see if God exists. If I turn into a Christian, then you know that the science experiment is in your favor. if not, maybe you should rethink it and test it again. But
well, unfortunately, it's not an experiment that's falsifiable that way, because if not, you just don't know. As they like to say, God works in mysterious ways, which, as Ricky Gervais says, is a equivalent going, nah, 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 and stick your fingers in your ears and stop thinking. So, I think the bottom line is, when your friend said they hope you become a Christian, I guess what he means is hopes. I mean, charitably, what he means that one hopes is he hopes for good things for you. But people have asked. I remember Richard Dawkins and I were at an event in Australia at the Sydney Opera House, and someone in the audience afterwards, it's a huge audience, but someone asked a question saying, what can you do to encourage people to follow you? And our answer was, we don't want people to follow us.
I actually saw that. I listened to that today, ironically enough. But
so that's the main thing. That's the difference between, I think, if someone wants you to follow them, you should be wary, right?
Right. That's a guru type character. But I know, I do think it's really interesting how people are misinterpreting science for ideology. It's like, because if there was a better theory of gravity tomorrow that had nothing to do with what we think, it would be trash canned, and it would not even affect me at all. I would just be like,
and if evolution didn't work, if evolution wasn't the basis of modern biology and allow you to do experiments and make predictions that work, then biologists would throw it out. It's not some conspiracy
right?
People have to try and say, look, we'll shake hands in a dark room and we'll all agree to this, and we won't tell anybody that it's false.
Right?
It's just such garbage, because I feel like I've said it all one time or another, but what you do if you're a scientist is you go into work every day to some extent and try and prove your colleagues wrong.
Right. Yeah.
Because in some ways that's the way to make progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so on that note, I think just because you brought up biology, I was just listening to a debate with you and William Lane Craig, and you had said I can't even understand how. I mean, I still can't tell if he's being authentic or if it's not that it matters.
Does it for a living, but it's hard to know. I think, but a lot of the stuff is just an act, but I think at some basic level he believes it.
Well, it's like one of his things, and this isn't what I was going to talk about, but one of those things that he does is he says, okay, so you as a non-theist think that you don't have an answer for this. As a theist, we have an answer for this. God did it, so therefore God must have done it. And it's like, wait, what?
No, many of his arguments are about that deep, I have to say.
Yeah, it's really.
He does, at least I think he's ill now, but he used to, as far as I can see, debate for a living.
Oh wow!
And so therefore he picked up tools to make it sound good and convince some people. But I think in the end, it's kind of amazing how literally vacuous most of his statements are. And what I discovered that got me upset was that he'd just say no. He said things that he knew were false, and I don't mind people that are deluded. Or not even deluded, but just not knowledgeable on certain things, or have misperceptions. But I don't have any patience for people who say things that they know to be false. I mean, I may say things that give people the wrong impression or misunderstanding. I try not to, but I try to explain things as I understand them. And if I don't understand them, I like to think I'm able to say I don't understand them.
Right. Yeah, I think he's kind of like the Deepak Chopra of Christianity,
Deepak Chopra is another one I've had many conversations with, but no, I think Deepak Chopra is different than William Lane Craig. Deepak Chopra is just he wants to be appreciated by scientists, and he just spouts this gobbledygook, and I think he's well-meaning. Whereas
no, he is,
spouts stuff that I think he knows can try and convince people, and I don't think Deepak Chopra necessarily is interested in that. He just spouts this gobbledygook and hopes for the best.
Well, yeah, and I think that because quantum physics is so mysterious, I mean, it's really easy if you don't actually understand, wave theory, like how the wave function is. If you don't understand kind of like what the wave function is, to be able to say things exist in two places at once when it's like, it's a little bit deeper than that to say it than that.
Well, I mean, quantum mechanics is very deep. I'm thinking of writing my next book about quantum mechanics in detail, because quantum mechanics is just totally misunderstood and by so many people, and it's such a fundamental part of our technology, and it'll become a more important part of over the 21st century.
I think it's really interesting, and it kind of it gives the ability for these kinds of like mystical characters to
it's the most abused part of physics. These people, if they start spouting quantum nonsense, I like there's a movie I reviewed briefly on Twitter, because I like the Ant-Man, the first one. The second one was just so ludicrous, because it was all quantum this and quantum that and quantum garbage. And at one point in the movie, I said this, and it's a tweet, and then someone tweeted back saying, didn't their favorite line was when Ant-Man looks at these scientists and said, do you guys just put quantum in front of everything? It was making fun of itself, which is nice. But
Well, so I have a question about dark energy. Okay. And I know that this is probably not like, I obviously am not into the sciences that much, so I don't know how to really explain this, but I was wondering, do you think that it's a possibility that the particles, like the mass of dark energy, it's like traveling faster than the speed of light, and that's why we can't? No,
because as far as we can tell, dark energy doesn't involve any particles. Dark matter does. Okay. But dark matter is, I mean, when I was your age, dark matter was very exotic, because it was the stuff that made up galaxies and the mysterious new elementary particles. It's still all of that, but it's nowhere near as exotic as dark energy, which is just the energy of empty space. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. It just weighs something.
I guess and like I said, I don't understand this stuff at all. So, but so I guess my thing, the reason why I was wondering that is because if it's not there, maybe it just doesn't appear to be there because we can't observe it.
Well, that's a good supposition, but it's not. But there are tests for that.
Okay.
And the bottom line is that anything that has any particles of any sort are gravitationally attracted to other particles. Okay, and this energy of dark energy is gravitationally repulsive. And the equations of general relativity tell us that the only thing that can produce a kind of energy that's gravitationally repulsive is the energy of nothing.
Okay.
So any particles, even if we couldn't see them, in general relativity, will have that property of being gravitationally attractive. They won't reproduce the properties that we measure dark energy to have.
Okay.
Now, of course, that doesn't mean that maybe general relativity is wrong.
Right.
At some level, and there are physicists who explore that possibility. No one's come up with anything at all interesting, and most of those ideas are ruled out. But it's certainly still a possibility at this point.
Right. So, I mean, we have yet to ever observe anything that goes faster than the speed of light, though, right? I mean, that's
no, yeah, we haven't, and certainly, what's true is that if something, all the particles, everything we know of travels slower than or equal to the speed of light. And what's true is if it travels slower than or equal to the speed of light, it would take an infinite amount of energy to make it go faster than the speed of light. Right, now, there is a possibility in physics of these particles called tachyons, which would literally go backwards in time, by the way, but they always would travel faster than light. They can never be slowed down to light speed. So that is a theoretical possibility. There's no evidence for it, and there's no theory that suggests such particles could exist or would exist, but it's certainly possible theoretically within the framework of special relativity and general relativity. But none of the particles we know of, all of them, including light, travels at or equal or less than the speed of light. And as I said, there's no experiment you could do. There's no pump you could give them that would make them move faster than light.
It's something that totally fascinates me because I kind of like, I guess it seems
like nature, like, if you're smart enough, you should come up with a way.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, it just seems like it's almost limiting because that's just the fastest thing we've observed. So
it's much, not just that, it's far deeper. It's right. A central aspect of our understanding of the way the universe works. And it is limiting,
Yeah.
but the universe is limiting. You know, the universe is what it is, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, definitely. I started to read about what light is and electromagnetism, and it fascinated me so much. I was driving to work one day and it made me start crying because I
Wow.
I saw the sun rising. I know I don't think I've ever said that out loud before, but I saw the sun rising, and and I was just like, this is all here just because, and it's so crazy. It's just,
It's amazing that we are around to experience it.
yeah,
And,
we're
and,
so
and you know, that's
lucky.
why, by the way, in I know you're talking about my books, but the last book, The Greatest Story Ever Told So Far, is really light plays a central role in that. I mean, I basically explain how we understood light, and then I explain how our understanding of light formed the basis for our understanding of the rest of modern physics.
Yeah, it's just, what's so crazy about it is it light is so much more than just something that we see, because it's the energy that everything gets from each other, and it's this crazy
Well, it's based on
connection.
one of the four fundamental forces of nature, electricity and magnetism, the one that operates most effectively on our scale. So the existence of electricity and magnetism is equivalent to the existence of light. Light is ubiquitous because electromagnetism is ubiquitous. It governs the chemistry of your body, the biology of your bodies, all governed by electromagnetic interactions.
It's so cool. So does it drive you a little crazy when people say that electromagnetism is really what gravity is and the earth is flat?
Nothing drives me crazy. That certainly doesn't drive me crazy. No. Uh,
I
um,
Because it's just such a misuse of what electromagnetism is.
Well, people say lots of nonsense all the time. Most of the time, I just chalk it off to ignorance, and that's okay because ignorant people can be taught. Sometimes it's chalked it off to dogmatism, and those people you just don't waste your time on. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no excuse. I mean, having weird ideas about electricity, magnetism, and gravity is something a lot of people have. So that's okay. But saying the Earth is flat, there's no excuse in the 21st century for saying the Earth is flat. People who say the Earth is flat, I mean, they're just not worth talking to.
Yeah, I actually work with someone that does.
No,
So
how can anyone believe that? And okay, given the evidence, that it's so sad.
I understand completely where you're coming from, because it's just as frustrating to me. But it's really bizarre though, because he uses all of these really scientific uh, ways of thinking, like, don't take everything for somebody else's word. Don't, not everything you read is true. Like, you need to investigate stuff yourself. You need to do this. Meanwhile,
And that's been for him. That's equivalent to saying that science is a vast conspiracy.
it
Not
is
to
exactly
believe.
what he
And
says.
it's fine not to believe things, but you can. But the bottom line is, when your theory disagrees with evidence, the theory is wrong,
Yeah,
and the evidence, not the scientists, but the evidence, the fact that there are time zones, the fact that there's seasons,
I know.
all
I know. Yeah. It,
and and so what's remarkably interesting is that people think that science is a series of compartments and you could change what happens here and it's not affected by all the other compartments.
right.
And as I like to say, it's the same thing for people who think the Earth is 6,000 years old. They're hypocrites if they get in their car.
Well,
They're hypocrites if they turn on a toaster, because the laws of physics and chemistry that govern how your car works, how your toaster works, or how an airplane flies are the same things that tell us the Earth isn't 6,000 years old, that tell us the Earth isn't flat. So he's fine if he thinks the Earth is flat, but don't get into your car. Don't fly in an
don't
airplane.
type on the internet.
Don't type on the internet. Don't do anything, because it's all a conspiracy, and it must all be being developed in your room to fool you every single second of your life.
Well, it's really funny because one of the things that he was saying, he was like saying all this stuff about CERN, and I mean, I really just, this rolls off me like water off a duck, but
Mhm.
it's like, he was talking about CERN and how CERN's this big satanic temple or something. And I'm thinking, dude, did you read about this on the internet? Because CERN developed the internet. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean? Like you should be thanking them that you can even read these fucking crazy conspiracies.
No, I mean, it's amazing. That's the point. You're right. CERN did, the World Wide Web because physicists needed to communicate to one another.
Yeah. So,
And I have to say that I've been to CERN. Now, of course, he won't believe me, but I haven't been asked to do any satanic rituals. I've been asked to put on a hard hat when I go down to the experiment, make sure
well,
my watch is not there and other things if the magnetic fields are high. But
he saw this article where it said that they faked like the guys at CERN were joking around and playing off of it and faked a sacrifice. And I thought that was rich. I was like, if I worked at CERN, I would do that 100%. There's no question in my mind. I would be the guy that does that, you know? So.
Well, look what happened. So,
well, they did it just because of all these conspiracies, I'm sure.
Yeah, I know, but it's the problem is that nowadays on the internet, you know, no one knows your dog. I mean, it's hard to know how people will take anything.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, well, and that's part of the reason why it's so important to continue saying a message like yours, which is to think rationally, because if we don't give kids the tools to think this way, then things like this are just going to continue to spread.
And sure, questioning, as your friend says, is really important. Question everything, but you know, rely on evidence and not everything in life is a conspiracy to fool you. But you know, but you're the easiest person to fool yourself.
I've said that 100 times on this podcast, and it's so true. I mean, I've done it to myself about tons of things throughout my life. And I don't think that I really have any belief systems that I would be afraid to challenge, because I don't feel like I have any belief systems anymore. But in the past, I certainly have. And having those things crushed was the thing that made me start to think this way, you know, and it was for the better. So maybe
tell your friend that, you know, if it's free to, you know, one of my favorite quotes, which you probably heard me say, is that I'm a publisher of the New York Times, that I like to keep an open mind, but not so open that my brains fall out.
Yes, it's one of my favorites.
And the bottom line is that if you see something and it's so wacky that it disagrees with everything else you've experienced in your life, it's probably wrong.
Yeah.
Now, not always, but probably. And so if it's inconsistent with the other things you've tested and know to be true, that the sun gets up in the morning, you know, goes up in the morning, and that it's light during the day and dark at night, and all. I mean, if it's inconsistent with basic facts that have been fundamental to your life, then it's probably wrong.
Right. And I think that there's just something sexy about conspiracies. You know, I think that it's just.
I think everyone wants to think that there's something going on behind their backs.
Well, of course, but it also tidies up all those answers that we were talking about earlier. It
gives you the answer when you don't have the answer. Yeah, that's right.
So,
and religion is a big conspiracy.
Yeah, I know.
In fact, it's such a conspiracy that they have to reinforce it every Sunday, right? At least in Christian religion. You know, I have a friend, actually, he's a very famous guy named Hugh Downs. You probably don't know him because you're so young, but Hugh Downs was a network anchor and for many years on TV, and was the host of various shows. But he was the first one to say to me, you know, he thought the reason that people had church every Sunday is that the ideas were so ludicrous that you have to go back, get them back every Sunday to keep them believing, to keep pounding it into their heads, because if you go away for a year and you haven't had that nonsense drilled into your head for a while, then you might begin to question it.
Yeah. Well, I know when I was in Christian school and I started to really realize, I mean, first of all, Noah's Ark was the thing that pushed me over the edge, but, and cause I was so young, that was the first thing. But I mean, then you look at everything.
Yeah.
And I just remember being so indoctrinated to it that I when I was questioning it in my head, I could, like my subconscious was telling me, no, you know, like, this isn't true. God loves you. God is real, whatever. And then I would still subconsciously pray sometimes as I slowly started to drift away. And now I'm at the point now where it's like, it's like a Santa Claus story, you know, but for a long time,
maybe you may find yourself praying every now and then. It's hard to
well, there's nothing bad about thinking positive thoughts, but I definitely think that thinking positive thoughts to somebody aside from yourself is a little crazy, like literally crazy.
If you're not talking to them and they're not in the room.
Right.
Different. If someone's actually there, maybe it's a good idea. But if there's no one there, it's probably always a good idea.
So to circle back to this William Lane Craig thing, you said on there that you don't think that we have an answer for consciousness. And I was wondering if you still thought that way.
Well, we don't know what consciousness is yet. I mean, I really don't think at some deep level. I mean, you can say self-awareness, but what do you mean by that? I think it's one of the biggest unsolved problems, I think, in a combination of neuroscience and artificial intelligence. When are you self-aware, and what are the components that lead to consciousness? So how do you become conscious? If we could do that, we might understand what consciousness is a bit more. But I still think I've heard there's so many books about consciousness. I think you've heard me say. I feel like I just repeat myself all the time, but hopefully not. But
no, go ahead.
There's so many books on consciousness because we understand so little about it.
Yeah.
As someone's pointed out, you only need one book on quantum mechanics, right? But if there's lots of people flailing around, lots of people are writing. Now it's a incredibly exciting area, and there's a lot of facets. Obviously I'm more conscious, than my Mac, and my Mac is more conscious than a PC. It's clear that there's a vast, there's lots of things you can say, and it's kind of like art or pornography. You know it when you see it, as that judge once said.
Yeah.
You can sort of tell something's conscious or something's not conscious. And it's like life, when something's living, but defining what life is turns out to be very difficult. What are the characteristics that take you from inanimate objects to animate objects? It sounds like it should be obvious, but then try and puzzle it through, and you'll see it's a lot more subtle than you think. And so, that's why things like the Turing test, I'm not sure if you're aware what that is, but
yeah.
Alan Turing suggested that if a computer could basically fool you for long enough, if you talk to it,
it would
essentially be indistinguishable from something that's conscious. But I'm not even convinced that, because people are easily fooled. We've learned, right? You can talk to one of these computers that is trained to, be sympathetic, and it's machine learning. So, but it's clearly not conscious, but it can have a conversation with you for a long time, and maybe even make you feel better.
Right. I talked to Dr. Stephen Novella. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
I talked to him last week, and when I talked to him about this, because for me, consciousness seems really easy. I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, but to me, it just logically, I think it's part of the brain. I don't think that it's anything like an antenna.
Of course it's part of the brain. I mean, the brain is responsible for it, or whatever you want to call it, conscious.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I guess then to me it seems like once you start to take away parts of the brain, then you start to take away consciousness. So and in the brain you can test certain parts, certain neurons and things like that, and have responses and have out of body experiences and whatever other craziness.
Sure, but it's still so complicated. Sure, we can do simple things like the visual pathway we now know, and friends of mine actually many years ago won the Nobel Prize for understanding the visual pathway. So there's certain simple things we can do at a base level of understanding how the brain responds to signals and turns into a visual field.
Right.
And we certainly do know, you're right, that if you take, if the brain injuries, then you lose, at some level you lose consciousness. So, but I don't think anyone knows the level of complexity that's necessary.
Right. I definitely agree with you on that. Yeah. I mean, because it's fucking billions of years of progress, though. I mean, I can't think that we would figure it out in 100 years. But
well, you never know. Some may have a really good idea, but I think it's a hard problem, which is why I do physics, because it's much easier.
Well, so I guess I was going to ask about AI, because for some reason this has been on my mind lately, and with people trying to figure out how to make AI self-aware, or more like general intelligence and whatever. I agree with you. Because for me, it seems like if it's this whole thing where all of a sudden we're just going to click a button and it's going to be awake, that seems totally mystical to me. Like, I
don't think any AI researchers would even think of that. So.
I don't either. And I think that it's really bizarre to me that this is such a huge concern for people that are intellects. And because I think the reason I think it's bizarre is because it's like they're really worried about AI taking over and then all of a sudden humans going away. But if consciousness is just a byproduct of the brain and AI is now just conscious, isn't that the next step in the evolution? I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, the point is that people are, well, there are things to be worried about, but I don't think that these vague general worries are really much a problem right now. But you're absolutely right. I mean, what is clear is if you had a working AI system that was self-aware and could self-program, then it would be able to improve much faster than humans do, because we're dependent on biology, basically.
Right.
And so the the best learning would happen there. And you're right, that would be so that any biological system would realize in order to keep up would have to sort of integrate AI at some level. And so you'd have to expect, if humans were going to remain in their dominant intellectual position,
Right.
that they would have to incorporate AI into them. But the alternative is that they just may not be. I mean, and they may be able to do other things, enjoy music, literature, writing, and allow us. But, the problem is that one doesn't know. I mean, if AI is initially programmed, then of course its goals and what it thinks of as quote unquote good could be different, right? And it could, it could, say it's programmed not to. Well, here's the example. It's a simple example: self-driving cars.
Yes.
Okay? You program these things to learn from the environment so they can see things, so they don't run over bicyclists or hit walls. Okay, so you're in a car and there's a bicyclist with a little baby in there in the carrier there in the way of the car. So the car is has to make a decision what to do, and the decision could be, look, there are two of them. There's one of you. I'm going to run into that wall and kill you.
Yeah.
Okay. Most people are not that altruistic.
Right.
And so there's all sorts of questions that you need to address if you're thinking about a system that it's really machine learning then more than artificial intelligence. But ultimately it'll just be different. The world will be different.
Right.
And it can be miserable or it can be not miserable. And a lot of it will depend on how we address the AI problem. I mean, it could be miserable because AI will take over most jobs.
Yeah.
So will people
it already has, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it already has taken over some, but it'll take over almost all of them in many ways. And so we could live in a system where the people who control AI control all the funds, all the money, all the power, and that's probably what would happen. Yeah. Or we could live in a system where you say, okay, well, everyone benefits from the fact that AI can do stuff, so we can all go to coffee houses and listen to music and do those things and make life better for everybody.
And that was initially what we were talking about in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, what was going to happen in the future, and it yet to exist.
John Maynard Keynes, I think, talked about the Industrial Revolution that way, that eventually machines would make life better for everyone,
right?
Give us more leisure time and make more productivity, which we could all benefit from, and therefore we could all have work less and enjoy life more. But that's not the way things worked out, is it?
No, not at all.
Well, to some extent it has, I have to say. I mean, it has.
Well, it provides us with.
In most of the world, we don't have, 15-hour child labor like we used to and things like that.
Sure. I mean, but from the same sense, and I'm sure this has a lot to do with our current political climate, but, like women, I don't want to live by this stereotype, obviously, but it's like the guy used to work, the woman used to stay home. I'm just saying we used to be able to survive off of one income. Now that's nearly impossible. So, I mean, that's something that.
Well, I'm hoping soon, eventually we'll all have to survive off zero income. And it'll, I mean, if machines basically do everything, right? And so either everyone doesn't survive or we have a new way of partitioning resources.
Right.
And it's up to humans. That's not a problem that's a much harder problem than the problem of AI, which is how to manage a social system. Political problems are usually much more difficult than technical ones.
Well, that's why we should have the AI do it.
Well, we may, and I mean, it may, if we,
it might come down to computation.
People like to give up control that way, but I mean, I think you're right. I mean, that's why people are worried about AI taking over doctors, lawyers, but if they do a better job of it, then it's okay with me.
I agree. I'm on the same.
I wrote a piece on AI that was supposed to appear in a book that's now not going to appear, and somewhere I'm hoping to publish it somewhere. But it was about artificial intelligence really isn't artificial. But I pointed out there that people, when writing was invented in the 8th or 9th century, when writing was brought into Greece in the 8th or 9th century, and then over the next 400 years, people like Plato and others decried writing, saying it would destroy storytelling.
Right.
Well, I mean, most of us think that it probably enhanced storytelling, but it's different.
Yeah, I mean, but that's how
things anymore and all these things, and because you can read them, and the memory would go away, and those things didn't happen. It just changed the world, and AI is going to change the world, and whether it gets better or worse, it's just going to change the world, and you can gnash your teeth over it for a long time. Now, fortune favors the prepared mind, and it's worthwhile thinking of the potential problems so that you can address them as they occur. But
Yeah, see,
yeah.
I guess my thing with this is because it's such a huge focus of people. I mean, people like Sam Harris, people that you know, it's
Mhm.
such a huge focus now for a lot of people. And it seems to me that this is almost it's almost like, early age humans debating on whether future humans are going to outdo them. If it's just the next step in biology, if it's the next step in evolution.
Well, it may be, but yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're right that a lot of people are overly concerned, especially since it isn't, in my opinion, that close.
Right.
Well, at the same time, it's good if you do, if that concern raises people's interest in the notion of machine learning, then it's a good thing because, it's happening. And so I'd like to learn more about machine learning than I know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would too, but this is just a new thing within the last 2 weeks that I got interested in thinking of, because Mick West brought it up to me, and I was like, I've never even thought about this before, but him and I had almost the same conversation. I mean, it was different, obviously. Your take on it is a lot more similar to mine. He is like freaking out about it, and that's why I think I've been thinking about it so much, is because he was so worried.
Some people are freaking out, but yeah. Anyway, I think if it encourages us to think of we used to be involved in the doomsday clock, and a lot of people made fun of that. But my point was, if it encourages people to think about the dangers of nuclear war, maybe it's a good thing. And in this case, if it encourages people to think about the nature of AI and how human society works and how machines might learn, well, then that's a good thing. Anytime you encourage people to think, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. So, are you still concerned? I mean, I know that you were very outspoken about the Trump administration. What are your current thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I'm still concerned with that. We're in this ridiculous. I mean, we're in this ridiculous morass, and there are problems that have been created which are going to affect your generation for the next, well, at least a generation or two, that have been created because of this ridiculous administration and the Congress that supported it.
Yeah, it seems
so it's just a ludicrous situation we're in, and hopefully this too shall pass, but it's not going to pass easily.
No, I mean, it's really weird though that the Republicans are supposed to be about being conservative with money, and Trump has spent more money on the budget than.
Yeah, well, look, power. Look, what politicians want is power, and so a lot of politicians would just, these ideals go to this wayside when the question is, are you going to be in power or are you not going to be in power? And what we see is a disgusting situation where people are, as far as I can tell, are willing to throw out the things they say they believe in order to remain in power. And, it's not unusual. I think it's the norm, not the exception.
Right.
It'd be nice if people had a higher calling, but as far as we can see from evidence, at least the Republicans in Congress have not demonstrated that. Who knows if the Democrats would as well? I don't want to necessarily say it better, but at this point, the fact that no one is talking about the deficit right now, when that's all you were talked about during Obama, whereas the deficit's getting worse every day.
It's insane. I mean, it's
going to bankrupt the country. Not bankrupt. It's going to potentially bankrupt the country before you get to be my age and get Social Security. That's for sure.
Well, I just don't understand. Like before 2000, our entire deficit was like $4 trillion, and Trump is aiming to do that in his presidency, $4 trillion.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think he's aiming, but that's what will happen. He claimed that, of course. I mean, Trump will claim that the budget will be balanced and the deficit will go away while he's president. But it's just nothing he ever says, as far as I can see, is related to reality or truth.
Right.
Just the same as all the other nonsense that comes out of his mouth.
So do you think that he's just really intelligent and playing the cards, or do you think he's actually...
Well, I don't know if he's an idiot. He's ignorant. There's no doubt he's ignorant. He doesn't read. He doesn't think.
Yeah.
But he's got street smarts. He wouldn't have gotten where he was if he wasn't able to con people. Con men...
I guess that's what I'm wondering.
Skills. But I don't think native intelligence is deep in him at all. No, intelligence is related to curiosity, and the man isn't curious about anything.
Right, I agree with you. I guess I more so mean, do you think that like him using the left versus the right and antagonizing these two, do you think that is intentional, or do you think that he's just so embedded into his ideology that this just creates
his whole life he's gotten people, he's sort of gotten people to, he's confronted people, he's made fun of people, he's attempted to destroy people, and so that when that and he does that by criticizing and bullying and that's naturally played into the hands of politics. So I don't know if it's intentional, saying, well, I can turn, I can make, I just don't give him credit for that kind of intentionality. I think this is the way he behaves. And he behaves by demeaning and lying about those about essentially everyone except for himself. And and that's functioned well when you have then supported. We have a party that is willing to say, well, we can latch onto that to remain in power.
Gotcha. Well, that's cool. I just wanted to. I think I covered everything that I want to talk about with you, and we can go ahead and hit the stop on this if you'd like.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to go have dinner, but it's fun to have a conversation, and I hope somewhat illuminating, if not to you, to at least someone who may listen to this in the future.
I certainly hope so. So really quick, how can people find you on social medias and talk about some of your books and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, I've written 10 popular books and a bunch of scientific ones, and you can go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble and get them, or go to your local bookstore, hopefully. If they're an independent bookstore, support them. And my Twitter handle is lkrauss1, and I tweet periodically. And my webpage is lawrencemkrauss.com. And I have various Facebook pages. One is an author page, Lawrence M. Krauss, and then there's a Lawrence Krauss page. I mean, I don't use Facebook very much, but I do a little bit. I try and put things on there. I use Twitter more, maybe. And my web pages have links to a lot of, well, every article and TV thing I think I've done, and well, at least almost all of them. And so, and when I do public events, there's a calendar of events that are coming up, so you can see what's happening. There's not much happening over the next few months. The next event I know of at this point is in March in Tenerife in the Canary Islands.
Okay, great. Well, hang out with me just for 1 second. I'm going to hit pause on this.
Okay.